Hey associates! Alright, so this lecture is going to be all about kind of user guides, instructions, process standards, really just the general kind of idea and genre of technical writing that's really embedded in how do I explain to somebody how to do a task, how to complete a process, yet very much in that, like, here is literally the steps that you need to do. And I would say, like, again, this category of sort of user guides, instructions, procedures, standards are probably the most common or one of the most common forms of technical writing that we encounter just in our day-to-day lives, because every piece of equipment, every product, sort of goods, even some services, right? We encounter instructions that we are supposed to follow, or guides and manuals, right, that are used to correctly use the product. And so that is going to be our goal for today. And as always, make sure that you take breaks, right? If you're like, I can really only focus for 10 minutes at a time, take these videos, these lectures in 10-minute segments. Make sure to give yourselves a break. Today we are going to be really focused on just, again, the audience and some basic features of them, and then kind of walking through examples just to give you a sense of the genre itself. So, first, rhetorical situation, thinking about the audience, the what, when, why that we need to consider to ultimately make better products for them, and our end goal of just increasing the likelihood that the people who need it find it and actually use it and think that it is valuable. And so these are just some of the common qualities of the audience for our documents that we just want to, think about. And so in terms of what is their deal, they probably usually have some existing knowledge levels, right? They have a little bit of foundation, enough knowledge to know that they needed this product, that they have to complete this process, but obviously there is an upper limit. If they are using your user guide, that means that they don't know how to complete the task, right? And so we don't want to assume that they, really, are sort of expert and they totally understand this concept, because if they were that high level, they had that much knowledge, they probably wouldn't be reading, right, our guides. And so we definitely can rate them to a little bit lower level. We can assume they have at least some foundation, some background to the concepts, the terms, the general, why they would use the tool, the equipment, why they would complete the task, but obviously not tons of knowledge, because that's what they're turning to us for. And with that, these guides tend to be widely published as well. So it might be something that exists, online for consumers who bought the product to just go and access and use. It could be published sort of for a variety of employees to use, but again, kind of in a very public, sort of more widespread way. So that way as turnover happens, right, you're not writing directly to a specific person, you're writing to somebody who holds this job title, and people are, changing over jobs all the time, and so they just need access to this later. So that's kind of their, what is their deal? A little bit of knowledge, and they probably hold some role coming in and out of it, or they're just looking for this kind of information on how to use it. But a pretty wide audience is usually after these instruction sets, so we do write them at a little bit of a more neutral kind of lower level, just to accommodate kind of everybody who might need it. As far as when, usually these are happening at the point of action, right? So people are literally trying to, set up their new printer and it's not working. They have to troubleshoot it. They are going to look at the user guide when they are literally troubleshooting, right? You're baking cookies, recipes, are sort of an offshoot. They're kind of a form of technical writing. When do we follow a recipe? When we're literally trying to make the thing. So that applies to our super technical context as well. Usually people are using these documents at the point of trying to do it, or kind of just before. The other time is maybe at the point of purchase. So, we were spending a lot of time at Home Depot. We're renovating our house. So a lot of times we make a decision between maybe two products based on what's written, on the package as far as the instructions. Oh, this one is actually, for wood floors that are going to be glued down. Oh, we're looking for, this other type of product actually. And so these instruction sets are very much at the point of something is happening, kind of at the point of decision. So we want to make them super crisp, super easy to skim, because when people need it, right, they need that information at that moment to complete the task, to make the decision, not trying to get bogged down. And then last, why are they after these? Kind of why is the situation for these genres? Build a foundation of knowledge. Again, people have some knowledge, absolutely, but they are turning to the user guide to like figure out actually how to use it, to build up a little bit more of that foundation. These genres aren't necessarily meant to make somebody like a full expert in this, right? That would probably take a lot more, a series of manuals, maybe a lot more training. And so it's not the same as like recommendation reports or other formal reports or, progress reports where WISE, because they just want to make like a simple decision. They just want to know about the path forward. In our case, our audience's why for these user guides, instruction sets, process standards is kind of to build that like foundation of what I'm doing. Help me figure out what I'm doing literally right now. And then more so, complete a task efficiently, right? And so it's let me build up can I do this in the future? Can I do this on my own? And can I do this as efficiently as possible? Now, I like to put the term efficiently instead of something like correctly, because lots of people can do these tasks on their own and do it correctly. It just obviously takes a lot more time if we don't have some instructions to follow, and we kind of just go through more of that struggle on our own. So it's really people who know they need some more support, they know they want to build up a little bit more knowledge, but most importantly, they want to complete their task efficiently and they want to make the right decision. So that's our what, when, and why, generally speaking, when we're trying to figure out these genres. And then, of course, as writers, we dig in more specifically to make decisions about the design and the production of our instruction guides. And we have to really do that work of like, okay, but actually who, are our audiences and what additional features, accessibility and medium based should we be making to best support them in, that point of action in completing their task. Now, I've been watching a lot of Below Deck recently, and I've noticed, on that show that they have a lot of really specific processes and expectations to keep the crew safe, right? They have tons of safety things that the crew need to follow, but also that the charter guests need to follow, just again, to make sure that things are going smoothly, that things are going correctly. And so as I watch, there's definitely a lot of times where I catch, kind of glimpses of like user guides or a standard like posted, on a wall, right? When they're in the little Ski-Doo garage at the back of the yacht. There's a lot of signs and checklists, right, that are posted right there. They're made out of very waterproof materials, whether they're laminated or they're more like metal kind of like printed sign, because again, it's at the back of a Ski-Doo garage on a boat, very wet. You can't just have a piece of paper taped right next to all the water. That's not useful. So in that case, right, it's a very like laminated or durable document, and it just says, hey, like here's how you put the Ski-Doos away. Oh, is it not working? One episode, the Ski-Doo got waterlogged or something, and they went through the troubleshooting checklist that was actually written kind of right on the back panel of the Ski-Doo itself. And so in those cases, right, the writers who are designing it and helping for that product were thinking, when are the people going to be using it? Literally on the water when something is going wrong with the equipment, or when they're just trying to put it, away and making sure that it's secured properly. So it's very short, very durable, so that way they can follow the exact same steps, keep all the equipment and people safe. Then on the flip side, the interior, and so the interior crew, the chief stews and all of them, they also have a lot of checklists, but I notice it's more usually of like a printed, more of a paper form, because right, they're inside. There are less environmental factors, and they need to be able to actually carry it from room to room. So instead of it being like affixed to the wall, like in the Ski-Doo garage, it's something that they can just carry with them and run down, did we do all this stuff when we're cleaning the staterooms? And then on, the next side, people like, Captain Lee and Captain Sandy have huge, thick manuals of like everything that needs to know about the boat. But they always are kept in like the wheelhouse, the bridge, right? They can be these really thick, dense books because they are kind of living in a very like protected, or it's just in like the office, with people who, Captain Lee, Captain Sandy, they have an important job, but they also have kind of the time when they're doing their job to like sit and actually read through a thick manual. Or they might be looking at like, how to read the radar or something. A little less like immediate action high pressure in terms of somebody trying to put the ski-doo away in that moment. And he's just like, quick, boom, boom, boom. Here are the 3 steps that I have to do literally while I'm doing it, versus the folks up in the bridge who can kind of take in more information, right? And have more maybe that they have to consider and responsibility, but also they have more time to actually work with those documents. And so in this is just a case of thinking about the when and the why of the different jobs, right, on the boat, and how the instruction sets and user guides and process standards change depending on, that person's role. Okay, so here is an example then that I created. I was contracted and, as part of my job at one point to make a lot of kind of manuals and standards and stuff. And so unlike on a boat, right, I had a very static, very predictable what, when, why for my audience. So this is a guide for advisors at University of Northern Colorado, that I created to help them do their jobs. And so I, reliably knew that they were going to be at their computer when they're trying to access this information, because it's like part of their job, and their job is a very like office-bound, computer-bound job. And I knew that they'd be trying to access this either kind of quickly before or during like student appointments, or when they get like an email with a question and they just want to respond with the correct information promptly. And so in this case, I have obviously these links to deeper and frequently asked kind of questions, information that they might need. And then since I knew that they'd be accessing it on a computer like most of the time, right, we have these accordion drop downs, which is the main topics that, come up a lot. And so in this case, right, all of these links, it's the computer, they're online. These links are going to take them around. They could also copy, and paste the link and send it back to, the student in an email. So I was really thinking about how they can share this information easily as they're learning about the different steps and kind of instructions, and having that reference guide to do their jobs. I also knew it was okay if I had things that could be downloaded, because again, part of their jobs, part of their what's, their wins, and their whys is providing students information. So having things that, they could open this, download the worksheet, about probation, and literally print it and give it to a student, or download it and attach it to an email so a student would have that information as well. I also knew and sort of learned through some research, right, about the audience that, they do have quite a bit of training. And so I felt confident that they would know, okay, I do need to look at FERPA, and they would know what they should find under that section, or like the LAC advising, right, for that audience. They were trained on and know they have a baseline knowledge of what the LAC is. Then they open it to find, some of the more specific details. So my research process in this case was really going through figuring out some of the specifics of the, what's and the whens people use it, and then starting to, over time, really learn a lot more of the whys. What are the common questions, the FAQs? Why are students coming to them? Why are they looking up this information? We also created a student-facing site, which again, different what's. Similar wins, similar whys, but of course the different what comes into play here. So for the students, they got a lot of videos, and very short videos. We looked at our analytics, trying to keep videos shorter than 3 minutes, because we know, hey, especially when they're learning about a policy, like a couple minutes and then they're out. Whereas the advisors had not as many videos, because, they are kind of expected as part of their job and their new professional standing, to be able to kind of read through, and they've had prior training. And then same with the students. We wrote out more of these statements, right, giving more context. Then the advising site just had the title of the topic. Again, the advisors, because of their what and their existing knowledge, know what things are called. They just needed help remembering the specific details or providing the actual forms. Whereas the students have even less knowledge about the what. And so we wanted to provide more context than just saying written communication. It's like, no. You have a couple of options. Did you know that? And then they click on it and read more. So just be thinking about, as always, what, when, why. And for instructions especially, that's where we really see those answers to our what, when, why, our rhetorical situation, impacting the decisions that we actually make on the content that we create. So let's just go through, take a little bit of a break, right? Spend 15 minutes, take a break, and then we're going to go through some common features, best practices, looking at examples. So get a snack, water, go outside, whatever you need to do, and then come back ready to focus up again. All right. So one of the first kind of just choices and things as writers is what we call the problem-solving model. And basically, with this problem-solving model, it's just a really helpful way to figure out what we need to write about in combination with our situation analysis, our rhetorical analysis. And so this comes from that Markle book that you can grab, the reference way. But basically, think about what is the problem or the opportunity, right? In this case, we're talking about a recommendation report, but this process can apply in every genre and can be really helpful for user guides as well. It's okay, what is the problem? Okay, how do people respond to the problem? Or what is the task? How do we respond to the task? What options do we have, for sharing this information? What options can we make? Are we doing a video? Or are we doing a website? Or are we doing, a printed manual? Think about all the possible options and how they can impact the reader. And then do a little bit of studying, really thinking about which one might be best. We might go through some user testing, some usability testing to actually figure out which kind of option and way to describe it and explain it is going to be best. And then we can draw conclusions from our testing, and then, we kind of move forward with our next rounds and publishing our guides. And so we'll see this general model pop up a lot as we get into the genres even more. But just be thinking about the basic steps. Figure out what the situation is. Establish, how we're going to sort of solve that problem or situation, how we're going to help the audience. Figure out our options for helping them. How are we going to design it and create stuff that explains, right, these steps to people? How are we going to know if they're working or if they need to be tweaked? And then how are we going to tweak it? Now, that first part of the process, right, about kind of figuring out the steps in the model, really is one of our first choices and goes into the boundary, right? We've talked a little bit about scope. And with scope, that's just kind of the limitations of sort of our topic, our document, what we're up to. And so when we think about, sort of the idea of scope, general rule of thumb I like to go with is 90-minute increments. If the thing I'm about to write about is going to take more than an hour, hour and a half, I consider if it's actually too big of the scope and deserves separate topics, separate sets of instructions. So if you're wow, this process is just super duper long, it might be a sign that it's just too complicated for one user guide, and you might want to break it up into more of the steps. And the idea behind that is somebody might already know how to do the first half. Instead of forcing them to read through and jump through your manual or your guide, give them the option to jump right to the second half, where they do have questions. And so the big thing though is to think about a clear start and a clear stop point. And that's how we can create more helpful content for readers. And even when we do write a full manual, so it's how to operate this full entire thing, how to fully build a computer from start to stop. Definitely more than 90-minute process, especially for the person who needs a manual about it. And so again, we could like put together a full kind of little booklet about it, but we'd still have sections for the clear start and the stop, right? One section about, prepping your motherboard. One section about installing the fans, right? One section about putting in the graphics card. One section, about reassembling the tower, right? Instead of just cramming it all together, you can break it up into the different sections to give our audience the choice. Where do we want to start? Where do we want to stop? Okay. So here's a great example. This is from our OIT office. They have this huge archive of guides for setting up Outlook. Again, to go through every single one of these things, way more than 90 minutes. And so they broke it in, this is a small snip, they broke it into all these different tasks and steps. So it's like, maybe I actually already know how to manage my notifications, but I just have a question about the focused inbox, right? Instead of reading through a whole thing, I can just jump straight to focused inbox. And so just think, what are the clear start stops, right? Manage blocked or allowed senders, right? Clear start, stop. How do I manage them? When I'm done managing them, that's the end, right? Reporting, clear start, stop. Here's step one, right? You get the email, right? You go through the process to report it, clear, kind of end to it. So think about how you can break it up into these subtasks with a clear start, stop points. It's all about giving our readers kind of that out and that in, right? To jump to the point of action that they're actually at and they actually have questions around. All right. As far as details, like we do want to make sure we have some good details, right? We want to be helpful, make sure the audience can picture and follow along, but we don't want to get too lost in it. There's just kind of that joke about, recipe blogs where it's like, oh my gosh, they're like really describing what these cookies are going to be like and how they first got them on a family outing. And it's like this whole narrative at the front part. This is why I say recipes are like kind of quasi-technical writing, because we usually end up with these long, like, narratives at the beginning. And at least what I always do, maybe it's because I'm a technical writer, but I'm just like, no, I'm just jumping straight, right, to the recipe, straight to your description of these specific steps, and what, the batter consistency should look like. That's the type of descriptive detail I want. Is my batter too thin, too thick? Is it too chunky? Is it clumpy? What does that mean? I don't want a bunch of descriptions about how your kitchen smelled while you were baking it and how, your child was smiling with this. Like, no, I don't care about that, right? I want to know the descriptive detail to help me complete the action at that point in time. So in this case, again, been real on my Breath of the Wild trip. So many great action and like helpful guides out there. So in this case, right, they're kind of talking about these golden Lionel locations. So we do have a couple paragraphs describing them, but we aren't going to get too lost in it. So it explains, here's what they are, what you should look for. Bullet points are great. I can quickly identify it, right? A photo is worth a lot of words, as we talked about some like graphics. Love photos, save space, save words, give us way more descriptive detail than we could really write about or read. Same with a map, right? It takes a lot of words to really describe exactly what's going on in this map. And they could have gone off on a real tangent describing the beautiful scenery, of Hylia, but instead, they just dropped some images to give us that descriptive detail and then offered a short paragraph about the most direct route to the Colosseum, right, is from this shrine, head south, go across this one bridge, right? So that's descriptive detail that helps me in the point of action complete the task without getting lost in all of this kind of extra, very pretty stuff, which is great. It's just a different genre, a different type of document, a whole different sort of reason for writing and a whole different audience set. All right. We also want to do what we call the imperative mood. So as you're giving, enough descriptive detail to help people think about what we call the imperative mood, which is basically command voice, right? So imperative mood just means that the subject is sort of this omniscient, implied kind of situation, and you're giving somebody a command. You don't need to worry about what it's like the actual word for it. Just know you are commanding, all right? And by commanding, that means we start with a verb and the subject, the reader, is just implied. They feel like, oh, you are talking directly to me with a command telling me what to do. And since our readers are most likely using this kind of at the point of action, or in this case, maybe just before the point of action, it is helpful to start with just a nice statement here. Easy, big, bold, great white space. My eye is drawn right towards it. Oh yeah, I need to aim for the face. Versus something like, player should aim for the lionel's face with the bow and arrow. That is the same meaning, right? I'm getting the exact same, understanding out of this whole sentence compared to command voice, right? And a really great image. These two work together to tell me, aim for the face with my bow and arrow, and maybe I consider using an ancient arrow, right, for max damage. So in 4 words in an image, it actually told me more information than this whole sentence, faster, snappier, to help me, again, in that point of action. And then you can always expand on it down here with more content. Let the reader choose if they want to get to that or not. All right, here's another example, point of action, that I think is even more good at thinking about the win, right? Compared to, if I was fighting a Lionel, I might still have the page up and kind of quickly scanning through for a few tips, but probably I would read it right before I maybe go into battle and just keep it up as a reference. In this case, right, my win is literally using it as I'm following, right, the steps. So this is, how to do a shrine, right? And so we see a little bit of a difference where the first one, when we're talking about the Lionels, they had a lot more paragraphs because again, it's yeah, I might be using it as I'm fighting them, but probably it's more of a right before. I'm gathering all the facts, the info, the good tips, and then I just want to quickly reference, what was that tip? Here, everything's a little bit chiller, right? The shrines aren't out to get you so much, a little chiller. And so I can actually be okay, step 1, let me get in position, reference this image. Okay, use magnesis to move the large metal cubes, to the left of the ramp. And then a little note for me. So literally I will do that step first, actually act it out. Okay, when I finish that step, pick up the ball, set it down right in front of the fan. Okay, literally I will do that step. So this is a really great imperative mood. Again, notice there's no subjects. They aren't saying you need to use magnesis or players will use magnesis. They're just saying use it, pick it up, use stasis, ride the platform, head where you need to go. Short, snappy, but very kind of clear, and sort of those steps and what we need to be doing. And so this is exactly the type of thing that we can test. And for the testing project, right, you'll give people your just written instructions and make sure that they can actually complete it. And you'll note places where they get lost or confused. You need to retweak. Maybe you need to add a step. It's very common for us, if we're more familiar with the process, to sort of skip a step that, again, somebody is using your manual because they don't know how to do it. And so you might stop and realize, oh, I skipped that step. I thought it was obvious, but it's only obvious because you already know, right, what you are supposed to do. All right, there's been about another 15 minutes. Take a break, and then we will wrap up with just a few more of these kind of best practices to think about. Okay, so as far as choices that we want to make, again, this comes from Marco Selber in the reference way, but here we're really thinking about definitions. So while we can assume they have some foundational knowledge from the audience, right, they got far enough to buy the product, get the job, figure out they need this task, we still want to define terms just in case they haven't heard that specific term before, or if it's something very new or specific to the process, or just a very highly technical kind of specific element to it, is going to be kind of the key there. And so just think about our different qualities of our documents, and then we make, right, a decision. So if it's a pretty simple term and it's pretty informal, we can use things like what we call a parenthetical definition, right, which is basically just by the way, this is what that means. So you can see the example. The computers were infected by a Trojan horse, a destructive program that appears to be benign, right? So it's pretty informal. You just want to let them know, hey, by the way, this is something you can do. So in your user guide, you might go with maybe a parenthetical definition right at the point where this new word is introduced. And then later on in sort of the glossary, build out a more extensive definition, or we can do more of a sentence, right? So generally, and like we say relatively, because like what is simple, what is complex, depends on your audience, depends on your field, depends on your term, but just as a general kind of what we want to think about. So sentences, right, give even more information. We explain it in a full sentence. And this is where we also start to see some differences between the like dictionary definition. Usually it's not a sentence, it's just like a statement, and technical definitions, right? We do like to write out full sentences. So their example in this report, electron microscope refers to any microscope that uses electrons rather than visible light to produce magnified images, right? And so it's kind of like, okay, now we know. Of course, the problem here is like we repeat microscope and twice. And so that's not always helpful, because what if they aren't sure exactly what, a microscope is? But we are starting to be like, this specific microscope, does what? Another, kind of example, this one does a good job of like what we call distinguishing. So crippleware is shareware in which some features of the program are disabled until the user buys a license to use the program, right? So we have shareware as kind of the category of what this crippleware is. So what's the term, what's its category, and then what are its features is really what we want to think about. And then last, we can have extended definitions, which are basically just like super detailed explanation, ends up being like a paragraph. And so what you're doing in your technical description templates is there to help you prepare for your portfolio, but more importantly, it forces you to collect all the information that can go into an extended definition. So that way, at the end of the semester, you'll be able to look back and write these nice extended definitions, reflect and kind of create, right, your portfolio of these different technical writing concepts. So the extended definition, usually a paragraph or two, really goes into, okay, what is the thing? Let's elaborate on it. Let me tell you some more like information about it, how it works, what are its features, its uses, its strengths, its elements, any, additional reading, all of that. So it really is sentence plus a bunch of other sentence in detail. So think of it as, right, your portfolio template activities. You're basically collecting the info you need to write extended definitions about our technical concepts. Here's an example of just a sentence definition, kind of related to higher ed. This actually came from our UCCS folks. And so the term that they are defining is the Carnegie classifications, right? So that's the thing. What category, like what is the thing, right? It is a way to categorize colleges. And what distinguishes it, it's about institutional diversity in higher education and kind of like the leading of it. And so, to overthink your sentence definitions, just imagine, okay, what is the thing? The Carnegie classifications. Like, that's the thing. Well, what type of thing is the thing? It's the leading way to identify and categorize. Okay, and then what kind of distinguishes this thing about institutional diversity in higher ed? Maybe compared to a housing and dining index, right? Compared to a LGBTQ kind of safe zone index, compared, right? There's a lot of different ways we categorize colleges and universities, but the different classification types, come into play. This one's about diversity in higher education, specifically diversity of like the programs that we offer. Okay, so don't overthink it, but we as technical writers are going to have still more detailed explanations and like a dictionary definition, because we are using it in such specific context, and we're using it for readers who need that information then and now at the point of action to complete something. In addition to definitions, one thing you'll see a lot as you're looking at like manuals and guides is like a product summary paragraph, but then also like specs with the user guide. Specs, right, just define the project. So it's things like, it depends, on what it is, but basically it's going to be things like the product dimensions, what materials is product made out of, how do you install it, what needs to be put on it, is it returnable, like what grade is it. So specs kind of go into these user guides and manuals and process standards and kind of fit with definitions a little bit, because they are ultimately giving somebody the information description that they need, usually about a product, to again decide if they're going to purchase it and then know if it is going to be usable and work in their space. And these, as you can see, it's just like super straightforward, right? We have dimensions, product length, mark if it's in inches or feet or centimeters or millimeters, or I doubt a product would go miles, but I don't know, maybe. Mark the unit, and then you just say, oh, this is flooring, happens to be 58 and an inch long, 5 inches wide, 0.375 inches thick, right? It's planks, it's a shadow finish. What type is it? Engineered wood board, right? So you just kind of go through and think of what details does a reader need to make an informed decision about this product and understand how it can be used and how it can be used with other products. Okay. And then kind of one of the last key things to think about is danger warnings. There's a lot of liability that gets wrapped up into user guides and products because we are helping people actually use the thing, right? As a point of action situation. And because it is a technical field, a lot of times there is risk involved. Risk to the person, the human operating the equipment or completing the process, but there's also risk to the equipment itself, or risk that something is going to be damaged. So it is very important to think about what are these risks and how can we help people minimize them? How can we make sure that they know about the risk? And so we generally have 4 things that we put into instruction sets, manuals, guides, standards. It's going to be, we call them signal words, but it basically is going to be danger at the highest level. Usually it's going to be a big red, danger. It's kind of a universal out in the world. Big red danger means there is serious hazard. Typically, you're going to reserve danger for like a potentially fatal hazard. So it's like, really, no, seriously, pay attention. We don't want to overuse the danger because then people tune it out, but we need to mark it. So if they're like, listen, danger, extremely high voltage, stand back. That tells people, oh my gosh, there's high risk of a fatality if you do not heed, right, the next steps and the danger. It could also be, loss of limb. Anything like that is going to be really, really dangerous. The next thing is warning. So again, we don't want to overuse danger. We try to save it for really immediate, serious, probably this is going to kill you type of stuff. Warnings can span a little bit bigger. So, if it's you're at risk of, getting a whole entire arm chopped off and maybe bleeding out, maybe that's worth the danger. But if it's you might, lose a finger, that could maybe be more of a warning, a little bit less fatal, but it's still serious potential for injury, maybe death, serious damage to the equipment as well. Generally, we don't put danger unless it's human hazards. Warnings tend to be more equipment hazards. But that will kind of depend on your institution. But just know, as you're consuming stuff as well, if you see a danger and a warning anywhere, stop and read the danger and the warning, because danger is telling you you could be seriously hurt if you don't look at this, Warning is telling you you might cost somebody a lot of money and be seriously hurt if you don't look at this. So an example of a warning. To prevent serious injury to your arms and hands, you must make sure the arm restraints are in place before operating this machine. Right? Just tell people, here's the warning, here's how to keep them safe. And then the bottom two, still important, still big alerts, but like it gets less immediate. So caution usually has, a yellow caution sign, and it's used to alert readers about like moderate injury or some serious equipment damage. So caution is often much more of like, you're going to mess up the equipment. You'll probably be okay, but like the equipment's not going to be okay. Warning is again more tied to like you are at high risk of being hurt as the equipment gets damaged. It's a fine line. Don't get too caught up in it. Just know cautions, definitely a lot of damage or destruction to the equipment. So for example, caution, do not use non-rechargeable batteries in this charging unit. They could damage the equipment, right? So it's like you're not necessarily going to get hurt, but they still need to know because that could cost somebody a lot of money. And then the last one is notes. And notes are just suggestions that we write to help readers carry out the process. And so we also emphasize them less, so that way draw most attention to our dangers, our warnings, our cautions. But notes are just kind of helpful, like FYI little tips. For example, note, 2 kinds of washers are provided, regular washers and locking washers. Be sure to use the locking washers on step 5. Right? And then you would put that note right on step 5. So, signal words that we're going to think about for our manuals. Danger, warning, caution, note. Danger, somebody might die. Warning, somebody might lose an arm or a finger or be seriously hurt. Caution, somebody's going to cost the company a lot of money if they mess this up. Note, just helping you along the way. All right, so here is an example from a Home Depot product. They just hopping into Home Depot and checking out some of these examples. Highly recommend you just pause and just search for stuff around Home Depot. But they have kind of a good kind of note, right? Again, nothing that bad's going to happen. It's just kind of helpful. Note, refer to the label for what trowels and stuff you need. Helpful. If I do that step, I'm going to be more successful down the road, right? Then they have nice command, voice, imperative mood, starting with a verb, telling them exactly what to do. Select a starter wall. Snap a chalk line. This one, they kind of start with more of a phrase, but we still know, okay, prior to installing, make sure I do this first. Secure a straight edge. And then they explain more. And then they kind of go on about, okay, you've gotten started. Let's talk about spreading the adhesive. Here's some more steps. Here's another note. Cool. All right. And then the last thing to kind of talk about quickly, it's similarly related to user guides, but they tend to be written more for the actual employees, the people needing it. So user guides, right, tend to be more in for consumers buying products, whereas standards, this other thing about standards here, is kind of more for people within a field. And basically what a standard is, it's just a agreed way of doing things, right? And it's super specific to a task or a process. So just think of a standard as, here is the way we as a profession have decided to do it, or here's the way we as a company are going to get it done. Think of it like your procedures, basically, or your protocols, you might hear it be called as well. And so a lot of technical fields have standards. This is from our IEEE database. You can get to it through the library, or you can be here's electrical safety codes, blockchain technology, digital health, learning technologies, nuclear engineering. You can see there's standards for everything that you might need. And so when you search for one that you are interested in, It opens up, it doesn't look too different from like the research articles you've been looking at before. We still got the abstract, scope, and then nice purpose statement, right? The purpose of this standard is to define terms of general applicability, get general requirements regarding test equipment and procedures, and describe methods for evaluation of test results. Right, so if you were looking, right, to define these terms for the IEEE standard for high voltage testing techniques, right, you would read it to figure out what are some key terms, right? They'll have some definitions. We'll look at that. What are the general requirements, equipment that we need, and what are the methods for getting these high voltage tests? We develop standards so that way, new products, goods, services, research, right, are all operating, kind of the same scope, baseline, and as it implies, standards just help with industry standardization. It just depends on your field and where you're going into, but look for, if you ever see, when you're onboarding for a new job or something and they tell you, oh, here's where all of our standards are, here's the link to our standards archive, like, you should save that link, and you should probably read through the standards to make sure that you are following the agreed way of doing things for the company that you are working for. And so in that standard that we're just looking at, they do have, right, definitions. Again, this was about high voltage testing. And so what is accuracy? So accuracy is the degree of agreement. Again, that's a type of thing. There's lots of ways that we can agree on stuff, or we can measure sort of kind of agreement between things. But the features here, measured value and the true value, right? So accuracy is the degree of agreement between a measured value and the true value. Great. Instead of something like standard deviation might be, the degree, I don't know, I'm not like a math person, but I'm sure there's something else. But accuracy, I haven't had to do anything with stats for a long time. But we think, okay, accuracy is what? It's a type of way to measure agreement or variance. And then what specifically is accuracy? It's the measured value and the true value. How far off base, right, are you in these values? All right. I lost it again. And then we have our approved measuring system, another definition. So a measuring system that is shown to comply with one or more of the sets of requirements described in this standard by an initial acceptance test, successive performance checks and performance tests, inclusion of the results of these tests in the record performance, and then they have a little footnote citation to read more. The system is approved only for the arrangements and operating conditions included in its record performance. So what is the approved measuring system? It's a specific measuring system. What makes it different than other measuring systems? It's shown to comply with one or more sets of requirements described in the standard. Right, so look for standards to kind of define terms that you're not sure about as well. All right, and the last thing to just really think about, biggest thing, and if you do this, you'll already be in a really great place, just trying to empathize and imagine the audience's perspective. All the different ways that they might interpret, misinterpret, try to use your products. Honestly, you just never know how people are going to take something that you've written. And so try to imagine as many as we can. So really all we can do is just strive to capture as many questions, perspectives, potential problems as possible. And then we get user feedback. We do a test. We might be surprised. So I did not think that they would try to use the product this way. And sometimes we don't know until we do some usability testing or until we see how people interact with it. And then also determine what your threshold of acceptability is as well. For example, maybe only a couple people are going to try to do a handstand, but everybody else, is following as we sort of expected, following as we kind of, wanted, wanted them to. But, maybe not. And so we do just definitely want to think about, what is your threshold? So for me, right, I write a lot of, hold on, that's fine. I write a lot of instructions, right, for class, right? All of your assignment briefs and RFPs and whatnot, ultimately it's just instructions. Here's what I want you to do. my threshold or what I think is acceptable is actually a little bit lower, right? If I can get like 85, 90% of the class taking the instructions, creating a product pretty similar, I'm happy with that. I know there's always going to be some questions, I just moving forward, but if most people, right, do the assignment and it's like pretty much what I kind of expected, they're all pretty similar, then I'm happy with the instructions that I've written. But in other situations, right, maybe for really expensive lab tests for your company, your standards threshold might need to be 95, 98%, right? It has to really be followed and completed correctly because, it's like expensive and it's going to be a problem if they mess it up. And the higher your threshold, the more testing and revising you need to do before it's officially kind of released, right? So if you're trying to get up to that 98, 99% kind of threshold of like people are doing this correctly and are understanding what they need to do, you're going to have to go through practice tests, practice runs, feedback, and a lot of revisions to try to get it up that high. And so as part of that, rhetorical situation, what, when, why, think about how can the audience interpret it in ways that we did not expect them to do? Is it important or dangerous if they misinterpret it? Again, when I'm writing assignment instructions, overall stakes are really low, right? Like, you're all going to be fine. Even if you do the assignment a little bit wrong, we correct it, we fix it, we move on. Stakes are overall really pretty low for our situation. But again, if you're in the lab, maybe the stakes are really high and suddenly there's a lot of danger if people misinterpret or don't understand the steps. So we think about that and then try to make those adjustments before widespread release. All right, and just as kind of a last thing to wrap up, a little shorter today, consider the 5 most important questions to ask as you develop your instruction sets, guide, standards, right? And so basically figure out who are the readers. Again, really think about their knowledge level, technical level, what their role is, what they are doing at this point of action. What do they need to be able to do because of these instructions, right? Is your action going to result in the product or the task that you set out to do? Are they actually going to be able to complete it? What is the situation that led to these instructions being written? Again, usually we write instructions because suddenly people aren't doing what we expected them to do. So just what is that situation? Are you tweaking existing ones? Did you get a brand new system and you have to write new instructions from scratch? Just what is the situation? And that, of course, impacts things like their knowledge level and your analysis. Think about how the instructions will be used in a very literal sense. Are they going to be, remember, out back of the boat, of the yacht in the water, or are they going to be in an office on the computer? Literally, when they use them, impacts what we want to design and what we ultimately want to produce for people. Also, do they need any pre-steps basically before they start? If so, make sure that they have access and can do that. And then last, try to imagine, write down as many problems as we can imagine that readers might encounter in attempting to use these instructions. And if you kind of do this little checklist, you'll have considered all the standards and you'll be in a really, really great place. All right, associates, this has been kind of a walkthrough with some great examples of user guides and definitions and the idea of process standards. At the end of the day, we're trying to help people at a point of action really decide, is this the steps, the tasks, the tools, the product that they need to complete the thing that they have to do. Write it in a nice commanding voice, start with some strong verbs, just tell them directly, crisply, clearly, with enough detail, but don't get lost in deep descriptions to accomplish the task and do it as efficiently as possible. Okay?